In the wastelands beyond civilization, where magic itself has burned the earth to glass, lives a man who was banished for knowing too much. The Mage of Ruins holds the key to finding the Starblade and the terrible truth about a prophecy written before Kael was born. Some knowledge is dangerous. Some truths destroy those who hear them. And some prophecies can only be fulfilled through sacrifice. The path to the legendary weapon begins here, in a place where hope went to die. The Ashen Wastes began where civilization ended, marked by a line so clear it might have been drawn with a ruler. On one side, green grass and living forest. On the other, crystallized earth that crunched like broken glass underfoot and trees transformed into sculptures of petrified horror, their branches frozen mid-writhe as if they'd died screaming. Kael stood at that border, Aldric beside him, staring out at the devastation that stretched to the horizon. The sky above the wastes was perpetually overcast with clouds that swirled in patterns that hurt to watch too long, and the air tasted of ozone and something bitter that coated the tongue. 50 years ago, this was farmland, Aldric said quietly. Villages, fields, forests teeming with life. Then Mordecai attempted something that should never have been attempted. A ritual to peer beyond the veils of time itself, to read the true shape of destiny. He wanted to see all possible futures, to know every path the world might take. What happened? The magic ate him. Or tried to. It consumed everything in a 20-mile radius, transforming matter at the fundamental level, turning life to crystal and hope to ash. Mordecai survived, but barely. And what he saw in those visions before the ritual collapsed. Aldric shook his head. It broke something in him. The royal court blamed him for the devastation, for the thousands who died. They banished him to the very wasteland he'd created. He's lived here ever since, alone with his visions and his guilt. And you think he'll help us? I think he's been waiting for you. Aldric placed a hand on Kael's shoulder. The prophecy he saw, the one that cost him everything, it was about you. About the last heir of the Luminari and the choice that would determine the fate of all realms. He's been expecting you for 17 years. Kael looked down at his hands, at the silver light that now flowed through them as naturally as blood. 3 days had passed since the ritual of awakening. 3 days of learning to control the power that had nearly torn him apart, of accessing the inherited memories that swirled at the edges of his consciousness. He was stronger now, faster, capable of things that would have seemed like miracles a week ago. But was he strong enough for what was coming? I should go alone, Kael said. The wastes are dangerous, and you'll get yourself killed within an hour, Aldric interrupted. The Ashen Wastes aren't just dead earth, Kael. They're saturated with wild magic, chaotic and unpredictable. Creatures live here that were transformed by the ritual, made into things that shouldn't exist. You need a guide. He gestured, and from the tree line behind them emerged a figure Kael recognized. Seraphine stepped forward, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She'd changed from her training robes into practical traveling clothes. Dark leather armor that moved like silk, a short sword at her hip, and a pack slung across her shoulders. Her midnight hair was bound in a tight braid, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years mastering her body as well as her magic. Seraphine knows the wastes, Aldric continued. She's made the journey to Mordecai's tower twice before, carrying messages from the sanctum. She'll get you there alive. Seraphine and Kael regarded each other warily. Since his arrival, she'd made no secret of her disdain for the untrained prince who'd been handed power he hadn't earned. But the ritual of awakening had changed the dynamic between them. He could see it in the way she looked at him now, still skeptical, still resentful, but with a grudging acknowledgement that he was no longer completely helpless. "Can you keep up?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I'll manage." "See that you do. I won't slow down for you, and I won't carry you when you collapse from exhaustion." She turned to Aldric. 3 days there, 1 day with Mordecai if he's feeling talkative, 3 days back. "We'll return in a week." "Assuming Mordecai cooperates," Aldric said. "His unpredictable. Some days he's lucid. Other days the visions consume him, and he can barely string 2 coherent sentences together." "Then we hope this is a good day." Seraphine started forward, crossing the boundary into the wastes without hesitation. Kael followed, and the moment his foot touched the crystallized earth, he felt the difference. The air was thicker here, charged with magic that had no purpose or direction, just raw chaotic energy looking for something to transform. His newly awakened senses screamed warnings, detecting threats in every shadow, every strange reflection in the glass-like ground. "Stay close," Seraphine called back without turning. "Don't touch anything that glows. Don't drink any water you find, no matter how thirsty you get. Don't look directly at the sky for more than a few seconds. And if you see something that looks like a person but doesn't cast a shadow, run." "Encouraging," Kael muttered, but he filed away each warning carefully. They walked in silence for the first hour, picking their way between crystallized trees and over ground that crunched and shattered under their boots. The landscape was beautiful in a terrible way. The wild magic had transformed everything into alien art, creating formations of impossible geometry, colors that existed at the edge of perception, patterns that seemed meaningful but always dissolved into nonsense when examined too closely. Occasionally, they passed remnants of the world that had existed before. A farmhouse transformed into a sculpture of twisted crystal, furniture still visible inside like insects in amber. A well where the water had become solid light, glowing faintly in the dim atmosphere. A child's toy, half stone and half something that shifted between states of matter when Kael looked at it too long. "You're staring," Seraphine said, not slowing her pace. "Don't. The wastes get into your head if you let them. The magic here wants to transform things, and that includes thoughts. Stare too long at the wrong thing, and you might find your mind crystallizing just like everything else." Kael pulled his gaze away from a particularly fascinating formation that resembled a frozen waterfall made of gemstones. "Have you lost anyone here?" "Everyone who comes here loses something," Seraphine replied. "The trick is making sure it's not something you can't afford to lose." She paused, then added more quietly, "My brother came here 5 years ago. He wanted to prove himself, thought he could harvest some of the crystallized magic for his research. We found his body 3 days later. He'd been transformed into living glass. Still breathing, still conscious, but unable to move or speak. We had to end it. Mercifully." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He was arrogant and stupid, thought his talent made him invincible. The wastes taught him otherwise. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but Kael could hear the pain underneath. "Let his death be a lesson to you, Prince. Power without wisdom is just another path to ruin." They continued in silence, and as the hours passed, Kael began to notice the creatures Aldric had warned about. Things that scuttled between the crystallized trees on too many legs. Shadows that moved independently of any light source. A creature that might have once been a deer but now had crystalline antlers that branched fractally into infinite complexity, its eyes glowing with mad intelligence. The deer thing watched them pass, and Kael felt its gaze like a physical weight. His hand moved instinctively to the silver light that pooled at his fingertips, ready to defend himself. "Don't," Seraphine hissed. "It's just watching. They're curious, not hostile. Usually. But if you attack first, you'll draw every transformed creature in a mile radius. They're all connected somehow, all part of the same chaotic system." Kael let the light fade, and after a long moment, the deer thing lost interest and bounded away, each step creating musical chimes as its crystalline hooves struck the ground. Night fell suddenly in the wastes, the perpetual clouds simply darkening from grey to black without the gradual transition of sunset. Seraphine led them to a formation of crystallized rocks that formed a natural shelter, then set about creating a perimeter of small stones marked with runes. "Wards," she explained, seeing Kael's curious look. "They won't stop anything determined, but they'll keep the smaller nuisances away and give us warning if something big approaches." They ate in silence, dried meat and hard bread from their packs, washed down with water they'd brought from outside the wastes. The food tasted like ash in Kael's mouth, and he realized it was the atmosphere affecting everything, even his sense of taste. "Tell me about Mordecai," Kael said finally. "What's he like?" Seraphine was quiet for a long moment, staring into the small, carefully controlled fire she'd conjured. "Broken," she said finally. "Brilliant but broken. He sees too much, knows too much. The prophecy he witnessed, the visions of all possible futures, they're still playing out in his head, constantly. He experiences past, present, and future simultaneously. Sometimes he'll answer questions you haven't asked yet. Other times he'll respond to conversations that happened years ago. It's disorienting. But he knows where the Starblade is. He knows where it was hidden. Whether he'll tell you is another question entirely." She looked at Kael directly, her ice-chip eyes reflecting firelight. "He'll test you. He always tests visitors. Tries to determine if they're part of the prophecy, if they're the ones he's been waiting for. Most fail his tests. I hope you're ready. I survived the ritual of awakening. That was just pain and power. Mordecai will test your mind, your will, your soul. He'll show you things you don't want to see, truths you'd rather ignore. Can you handle that?" Kael thought of the visions he'd experienced during the ritual. His mother's death. The fall of the Silver City. The terrible weight of destiny settling on shoulders that had, just days ago, been concerned only with plowing fields and avoiding his father's disappointment. "I can handle it," he said, with more confidence than he felt. Seraphine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." The night in the Ashen Wastes was worse than the day. Strange lights flickered in the distance, and sounds echoed across the crystallized landscape. Not animal sounds but something else, like music played on instruments made of pain and madness. Several times, Kael thought he saw figures moving just beyond the firelight, but when he looked directly, nothing was there. He tried to sleep but found it nearly impossible. His newly awakened senses were too attuned to the chaotic magic saturating everything, picking up disturbances and wrongness with every breath. When he finally did drift off, his dreams were fragmented and strange, mixing memories that weren't his with visions that might have been prophecy or might have been just the wastes getting into his head. He saw the Starblade, blazing with light that could unmake worlds. He saw himself wielding it, standing against impossible darkness. But he also saw other versions, timelines where he failed, where the blade shattered in his hands, where he turned it against his allies. The futures branched and split and rejoined in patterns too complex to follow. And through all the visions, a voice whispered. Not the Shadow King's voice but something older, something that might have been Mordecai or might have been the wastes themselves. The blade chooses its wielder. Power without sacrifice is illusion. What will you give up to save everything? What will you destroy to preserve what matters? The prophecy is written, but the ending remains unfinished. Choose wisely, last prince. Choose truly. Choose knowing that every choice is also a loss. Kael woke with a gasp to find dawn, or what passed for it in the wastes, beginning. The clouds had lightened to their usual grey, and Seraphine was already packed and ready to move. "Bad dreams?" she asked. "Is there any other kind here?" "No. Come on. We have another full day of walking before we reach Mordecai's tower." The second day was harder than the first. The terrain grew more treacherous, with chasms of crystallized void opening in the ground without warning and formations of solidified magic that resonated with frequencies that made Kael's teeth ache. They had to detour around several areas where the chaotic magic was so concentrated that reality itself seemed thin, and Kael caught glimpses of other places through the tears in the world. Alien landscapes that might have been different realms or might have been different times. They also encountered more creatures. Most avoided them, but one, a thing that looked like a bear made of living mercury, decided they were intruders in its territory. Seraphine dispatched it with brutal efficiency, her silver light cutting through its protean form before it could fully attack. The creature dissolved into puddles of reflective liquid that quickly evaporated, leaving behind only a stain that shifted colors in the light. "You're good," Kael observed. "I've been training since I was 5 years old," Seraphine replied, wiping her blade clean. "While you were plowing fields and living in ignorant bliss, I was learning to fight things that most people don't believe exist. So yes, I'm good. And I had to be, because unlike you, I didn't have ancient bloodline power waiting to be unlocked. Everything I can do, I earned." The resentment was clear in her voice, and Kael felt a flash of his own anger rising. "You think I asked for this? You think I wanted my entire life torn apart, wanted to learn my mother died saving me, wanted the weight of an entire realm's survival dropped on my shoulders?" "No," Seraphine said, her voice cold. "I think you got it anyway. And now you have power that others would kill for, would spend their entire lives trying to achieve, just handed to you because of whose bloodline you carry. Do you have any idea how that feels? To work for years, to sacrifice everything, only to watch someone waltz in and surpass you in a week because of an accident of birth. Is that what this is about? You're jealous." Seraphine spun on him, and for a moment Kael thought she might actually attack. Her eyes blazed with silver light, her hand on her sword hilt. "I'm angry," she hissed. "Angry that the world works this way. Angry that bloodline matters more than effort. Angry that I'll probably die protecting you, die so that the chosen one can fulfill some prophecy that was written before either of us was born, and no one will remember my name." They stood facing each other, tension crackling between them like the wild magic in the air. Then, slowly, Seraphine released her sword and stepped back. "But I'll do it anyway," she said quietly. "Because the alternative is letting the Shadow King win, and I won't allow that. My parents died fighting his forces. My brother died trying to gain power to fight him. I won't let their deaths be meaningless. So I'll get you to Mordecai, and I'll help you find the Starblade, and I'll probably die in the war that's coming. Not because I like you or think you deserve this power, but because it's the only path forward." Kael felt his anger drain away, replaced by something more complex. Respect, perhaps, mixed with genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry the world is the way it is. I'm sorry your family paid the price they did. And I'm sorry I can't change any of it. Save your apologies. Just don't waste what you've been given." Seraphine turned and continued walking. "And try not to die before you've done something useful." They didn't speak for the rest of the day, but the silence felt different now. Not comfortable, but at least honest. As evening approached, Seraphine pointed to a structure in the distance. "There, Mordecai's tower." It rose from the crystallized landscape like a broken finger pointing at the sky. Once, it must have been magnificent, a wizard's tower of classical design, tall and proud with windows that caught the light and battlements that spoke of both defense and beauty. But the wastes had claimed it just like everything else. Half the tower had been transformed into black crystal that pulsed within a light. The other half remained stone, but stone that constantly shifted and flowed like water frozen midwave. The two halves shouldn't have been able to coexist in the same structure, but somehow they did, held together by force of will or desperate magic, or perhaps just Mordecai's refusal to let his home collapse completely. They approached cautiously. The area around the tower was stranger than the surrounding wastes. The ground here didn't just crunch underfoot but sang in harmonics that almost formed words. Phantom images flickered through the air, showing the tower as it had been, as it was, as it might become. Kael saw versions where it was completely restored, others where it had crumbled to dust, still others where it existed in forms that hurt his eyes to perceive. "Multiple timelines bleeding through," Seraphine explained. "Mordecai exists slightly out of phase with normal time. It's a side effect of the ritual that broke him. He can't fully exist in just one timeline anymore. As they reached the tower's door, a heavy wooden thing that was simultaneously new and rotted to splinters depending on which angle you viewed it from, it swung open without them knocking. "Enter, enter," a voice called from within, layered with echoes as if multiple versions of the same person spoke slightly out of sync. The prince arrives, just as was foreseen. Late, but then again, also early, and precisely on time. All futures converge here, now, then, always. Kael exchanged a glance with Seraphine, who just shrugged and stepped inside. He followed. The interior of the tower was impossibly vast, larger than the exterior could contain. Stairs spiraled upward and downward simultaneously, leading to platforms that existed in multiple orientations to gravity. Books floated freely through the air, their pages turning on their own, and Kael realized with a start that some were being written in real time by invisible hands while others were unwriting themselves, text vanishing as he watched. And in the center of this impossible space, suspended in what might have been a chair or might have been empty air, sat Mordecai. He was old and young simultaneously. When Kael looked directly at him, he saw an ancient man with a beard down to his waist and eyes like bottomless wells. But in his peripheral vision, Mordecai was a young scholar barely out of his 20s, bright-eyed and eager. The two versions overlapped, occupying the same space, flickering between states. "Welcome, Kael, son of Elindra, last prince of a fallen realm, farmer boy, chosen one, doomed hero, potential savior, guaranteed tragedy," Mordecai said, his voice still layered with temporal echoes. "I've been expecting you for 17 years. Or was it 17 minutes? Time is such a peculiar thing when you experience all of it at once." "You know why I'm here," Kael said, trying to focus on a single version of the mage and failing. "I know why you will be here, why you are here, why you were here. Yes, yes, yes. The Starblade. The weapon that cuts reality. The key to victory and the instrument of potential doom. You seek it because you must, did seek it. The prophecy demanded, will demand it. Can you tell me where it is?" Mordecai laughed, and the sound echoed through multiple timelines. "I will tell you many things. But first, a test. The prophecy showed me futures, so many futures, branching and splitting like fractal trees. In most, you fail. In some, you never begin. In precious few, you succeed. But in all of them, in every single timeline I've witnessed, the outcome hinges on one thing: whether you can accept the truth of what you are and what you must become. I've accepted that I'm the last luminary heir, that I'm meant to fight the Shadow King." No, Mordecai shook his head, and Kael saw phantom versions of the gesture repeating infinitely. "That's what others have told you. That's the simple truth, the easy truth. I speak of the deeper truth, the harder truth, the truth that will break you or forge you." The mage gestured, and the space around them changed. They were no longer in the tower but standing in a void of swirling light and shadow. Kael felt Seraphine beside him, heard her sharp intake of breath. "Behold," Mordecai said, and visions erupted all around them. Kael saw himself wielding the Starblade against the Shadow King. Saw the epic battle, light against dark, the fate of all realms hanging in the balance. But he also saw the cost. Saw himself killing friends who were corrupted by shadow. Saw cities burning as collateral damage from their conflict. Saw the Starblade's power consuming him, turning him into something as terrible as what he fought against. He saw timelines where he won, and the victory was so pyrrhic that the realms were left broken and dying. He saw timelines where he lost, and darkness consumed everything. And he saw timelines where the outcome was ambiguous, neither victory nor defeat but something in between, a stalemate that could last for eons. "The prophecy is not about winning," Mordecai said softly. and for a moment his voice was singular, clear, fully present in one timeline. It's about choice. The Luminari were beings of pure light, convinced of their righteousness, unable to compromise with darkness. The Shadow King is pure darkness, consuming everything, unable to create or nurture. Both extremes. Both incomplete. I don't understand. You are both, Kael. Human and Luminari. Light and shadow. Your mother sent you to live as a human not just to hide you but to give you something the Luminari lacked, the ability to exist in the grey spaces between absolutes. That is your true power. Not the light you command, but the ability to understand and embrace contradiction. The visions shifted, showing Kael a scene he hadn't witnessed. King Aldric III in his throne room, the Obsidian Crown on his head, shadow power flowing through him. But in this vision, Kael stood before him, not as an enemy but as a bridge. The Starblade in his hands, yes, but not raised to strike. Extended, offering. And the king reaching out, the crown's corruption beginning to reverse, light and shadow finding balance instead of conflict. This is the path the prophecy offers, Mordecai said. Not to destroy the darkness but to integrate it. To find balance. But it requires you to accept shadow as well as light, to understand that both are necessary, that neither can exist without the other. The Shadow King won't accept balance, Kael protested. He wants total dominion. The Shadow King is mad with hunger, yes. Corrupted beyond redemption, perhaps. But shadow itself, the fundamental force he represents, is not evil. It is simply the other half of the equation. Light without shadow is blinding, consuming, sterile. Shadow without light is cold, empty, devouring. Together, they create the world as it exists, complex, nuanced, alive. Mordecai approached Kael, and for a moment he was fully present, fully in one timeline, an old man with eyes that had seen too much but still held desperate hope. The Starblade is hidden in the Twilight Sanctum, he said. A place that exists at the exact point between light and dark, in a space that is neither fully one realm nor another. To reach it, you must travel to the Thorn Peak Mountains, to the summit where the sun never fully rises nor fully sets. There, you'll find the gateway. But to claim the blade, you must prove you can wield it without being consumed by its power. The Starblade responds only to those who understand balance. How do I prove that? You'll know when the moment comes. Or you won't, and you'll die. Mordecai smiled sadly. The prophecy shows me the paths but not the outcomes. Your choices are still your own, Kael. That's what makes you dangerous to the Shadow King. He can see possible futures, but he can't predict which path you'll choose because you're still becoming what you're meant to be. The void dissolved, and they were back in the tower. Kael's head spun from the visions, from the weight of revelation. One more thing, Mordecai said, his voice already beginning to fragment again, splitting across timelines. The crown. The Obsidian Crown corrupting your king. It was created by something that claims allegiance to neither light nor dark, a being of pure balance that was driven mad by the first war between realms. To save the king, you'll need to understand what drove that being to madness and how to heal it. The crown is not inherently evil. It's broken, just like I'm broken. Just like the realms themselves are broken. Can it be fixed? Seraphine asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. Everything can be fixed or destroyed, Mordecai replied. The question is always which path serves the greater good. Now go, both of you. You have your answer. The Twilight Sanctum awaits. The Starblade waits. Destiny, fate, prophecy, choice, they all wait. Go, went, will go. Time is such a circle, isn't it? He waved his hand, and Kael felt reality shift. The tower spun, or they spun, or everything spun. When his vision cleared, He and Seraphine were standing outside, the crystallized wasteland stretching before them, the tower at their backs. "Did that just," Kael started. "He teleported us out. He does that when he's done with visitors." Seraphine looked back at the tower, her expression unreadable. "Well, you got your answer. The Twilight Sanctum. The Thorn Peak Mountains. Did the rest of it make any sense to you?" Kael thought about the visions, about Mordecai's words about balance and shadow and the true nature of his power. "More than I wish it did," he said quietly. They began the long walk back through the wastes, both lost in thought. Behind them, in his impossible tower, Mordecai watched them go across multiple timelines, seeing all the possible outcomes of their journey, hoping desperately that they would choose the path that led to survival. And in Eldengard, King Aldric III sat on his throne, the Obsidian Crown growing heavier on his head with each passing hour, shadows pooling in the corners of his vision, whispers beginning in the back of his mind. The corruption was spreading, just as prophecy foretold. All the pieces were moving now. The game was accelerating toward its climax. And somewhere in the spaces between realms, the Shadow King smiled and prepared his next move.